Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good day. So once again, this is your teacher in ethics, and we are going to discuss in week 4 the utilitarianism. This is the first of the many ethical theories and principles of which we will be discussing. And as a review, last week's the first 3 weeks are the basic principles and ideas of how to approach ethics in the idea of what is human act, acts of man, ignorance, modifiers of the acts, definition of philosophy, ethics, and many more. Now, as we proceed with the new chapter and new topics, you should understand that these ethical standards and ethical principles and theories should always be based or secluded with a specific idea in order for us not to be confused of how to understand them. So in short, it should be boxed or it should be specified in every topic. Now, our topic for week 4 is known to be utilitarianism, or in our module, it is the teleological ethics, okay? If you would say teleological ethics, in general, it is a ethical moral theory that derives its duty or moral obligation for what is good or bad on the end result of the action. So, the coverage for ULO2, this is teleological ethics, the ontology, virtue ethics, of which there's a bonus idea of the natural law. Now, teleological ethics has so many umbrellas or sub-branches, and one of it is consequentialism. It is, from the word itself, consequence, the end result is the reference if whether the action is good or bad. If the act is good if the result is good, and the act is bad if the consequence is bad. So as we continue, there are many sub-branches, as what I have told you. The general notion of it is that it should have a pleasurable or happiness in the end. And the following subcategories are the following: uh, egoism, hedonism, pragmatism, and utilitarianism. So we will discuss a little bit of them. First is egoism. It is a philosophical theory that is concerned about his or herself. From the word itself, ego or ego, which means I, the I is the center and the agent's motivation and the goal in his personal agenda. On the other hand, there are two types of egoism: the descriptive positive, wherein the variance conceives egoism as a factual description of human affairs. That is, that people are motivated by their own interest and desire, and they should and cannot be described otherwise. The next is the normative variant, of which is the purpose of that the person should be motivated regardless of what presently motivates their behavior. The term ego itself, as what I have told you, derived from the Latin word I in English. This egoism should be distinguished from egotism. So what is egotism? It is a psychological overvaluation of one's own importance or one's own activity. If you would compare egotism and egoism, there's a big difference because it is overvaluation ang egotism, while egoism is concerned on finding motivation and interest in the level of in the personal level or the level of oneself. Second is hedonism. Hedonism may be, many of us have heard of this ethical theory. It came from the Greek word hedone, which means pleasure. It claims that it is only pleasure and pain that motivates us. This is one of the primary concepts that was adopted by Jeremy Bentham. In his ethical philosophical approach, hedonism claims that only pleasure has a worth or value, and only pain or displeasure has this value or the opposite of worth. Now, let's tackle about Jeremy Bentham. In the idea of Jeremy Bentham in his application of hedonism, he asserted that both psychological and ethical hedonism, with the first two sentences of his book in the Introduction of Principles of Morals and Legislation, that nature has placed man under the governance of two sovereign masters, that is pain and pleasure. It is for them that alone the 2 points what we ought to do, as we do determine that we shall do. First is debate about the hedonism and what features of this many centuries ago that was used by Jeremy Bentham. Okay, and many debates over it, of which is also been tackled by many philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Epicurus, Aquinas, Butler, Hume, Mill, Nietzsche, and many more. But in general, if you would say hedonism, according to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, it is a pleasure is understood by broadly below. Okay, ecstasy, elation, enjoyment, euphoria, and the opposite is fear, gloominess, and etc. Now, thirdly is consequentialism. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that judges whether or not something is right by what is the consequence and are or what is in the end result of the action. For instance, most people would agree that lying is wrong, but if you are going to lie in order to help save a person's life with the use of consequentialism, it is a good action. It is the right thing to do. Hence, the moral dictates of the world and the doctrinal ethics, or so do say authoritative ethics, is not applicable in this ethical concept. It is where we heard that utilitarianism and hedonism in view to the teleological concept according to to ethics unwrapped in University of Texas, that utilitarianism judges the consequence by the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the standard in teleological ethics to see what is the greatest good for the greatest number. For hedonism, on the other hand, says something that is good if the consequence produces pleasure and avoidance of pain. So true enough, there are many branches under this teleological ethics that can be the source of our discussion in this slide of ours. But we'll be focusing on the point of view of these two great philosophers that who contributed many ideas and concepts in terms of studying teleological ethics, especially in utilitarianism. So, let's tackle first is Jeremy Bentham. He is known to be the founder of utilitarianism. And in his norm, he find out a problem that during his time lies that incapability of the laws or the social norms or yung mga batas to help people attain happiness. Now, in consequentialism, it is said that the action is permissible if it promotes pleasure or happiness or the majority. Now, let us explain a little about the concept of Jeremy Bentham. Maybe we could see that utilitarianism in general held to be the view that the morality or the moral right action that produces most good, and there are many ways to spell out in this claim in general. And one thing to note of that is the theory of forms of consequentialism, that the right action is understood entirely in terms of the consequence it produces. What distinguishes utilitarianism from egoism is that it has to do with the scope of the relevance of the consequence. Why? Because in egoism, it is commonly focused with a personal's ideology, while in utilitarianism, it is focused on the goodness of the majority. Now, Jeremy Bentham, as what we are discussing, is born in London at around 1748 and died around 1832. He is a well-known English philosopher and economist and theoretical jurist, and was influenced by Thomas Hobbes in accounts of human nature and David Hume's accounts on social utility. So, because of this, he marries these two, of which is the result is the idea of utilitarianism, of the modern concept of the utilitarianism. He said, as what we have been discussing, that the pleasure and pain will always dictate the action of the person. This govern us. So let's put that in mind. Yet he also stated that the principle of utility has a standards of right and action on the part of the governments or individual. That the action are approved when they are such to promote happiness or pleasure, and it should be disapproved when they have the tendency to cause unhappiness. Thus, this apparent endorsement of Hobbesian psychological egoism creates a problem in understanding his moral theory, since the psychological egoism rules out that acting to promote overall well-being when that is incompatible with one's own. Hence, it implies that we are not obliged to act to promote overall well-being when that is incompatible with our own. That is in the concept of egoism. So, this generates a serious tension, and Bentham's thought that one was drawn to his attention. He sometimes seems to think that he should reconcile the two commitments, the social and psychological and the egoism, and empirically have this. So what is this meaning, what is the meaning of empiricalism or empiricism? In the sense of experience, that is by nothing that we people act to promote good, they are helping themselves in doing that. They are learning and they are experiencing it in order to see the importance of seeing the goodness of the majority. That is why Jeremy Bentham enormously interested in the social reform, and indeed he reflected on the morally problematic idea of law and policies, which he wants to influence. That is why he created this idea of hedonic calculus, of which he said that people, especially those in government, must use this to check and to find out whether a law is applicable or not. That if a law can produce or have the benefit of making the majority happy. So let's have this as an example. So we have heard that some countries in the world has this protocol. This only we have heard. It is not sure or not that if you are positive in the coronavirus, it is like a death sentence. You are to be killed as soon as possible in order to prevent the spread of the virus. With application of utilitarianism in view of Bentham, it is the possible solution. It could be correct. Why? Because with the reason that it is better to sacrifice a single person than to infect many, that consequently will damage the economy, health, and many aspects of the society. It, which, which means that this justifies that it is okay to kill a single sick person than to compromise the whole society, of which is the possible result is the fall of the economy, death of many, and so on and so forth. This might sound disgusting for others, and especially for us who are following the moral standards that is inclined with the Filipino standards that was taught to us by the Christian morality that we have. But be reminded that our country, our home, our family is not the only source of morality in this world. Hence, what we can do is to see their perspective in the lens that is applicable to their action. So let me just clarify. I don't approve with the action with the basis of utilitarianism, but in the application of the concept, it is the right thing to do. Maybe as a precaution, we can see and we can do some protest and pass a humanitarian complaint in UN, but in reality, that is the that's what we can see. And lastly, another example is that we can discuss is in the hospital. Example, there are only one ventilator available, that there are two patients needing this ventilator, a 25-year-old and a 50-year-old person. And the first patient that is 25 years old uh, has the same complication due to the COVID virus, but the other one is an old one, 50 years old. Now, using consequentialism or utilitarianism, who do you think will the doctor will give the ventilator? The sound answer is with the 25-year-old. Why? Because the 25-year-old has a greater chance on survival rather than the 50-year-old. Consequently, as a medical practitioner, you would try your best to aid both of them. But when situation calls for it, will you see that one must take a call, and you should do the hard decision, and whatever it takes, maybe the best decision that the doctor or the any medical practitioner would choose is the person that has an age of 25 years old. Why? Because of the higher and greater response for recovery that would be pleasing for everyone. So let me repeat it and let me give an emphasis of this. Unlike Christian morality, which is the basis is absolute and universal in terms of what is right and wrong, in utilitarianism mainly is based in its moral judgment on the result of the action, and its rules are not absolute, for they should be altered whenever the circumstances may change. In summary, in the perspective of Jeremy Bentham, Utilitarianism does not classify any action or law as good or bad apart from its outcome or result. Killing, for instance, is not classified as evil or bad. In terms of Christian morality, it is wrong. Diba? It is stated in Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill. But in utilitarianism, it is not like that. And another example is that helping is not classified as a good or good action, unlike the traditional and conventional notion that to help somebody is the right thing to do. That believes that the intrinsic moral worth of an action will always be dependent to the result, that the human actions, just like abortion and other uh, seemingly alarming or scandalizing, if there's the term of it, uh, actions for the moral community that is following the traditional or moral community. For utilitarianism, it doesn't have this moral worth, for it is the consequence that determines whether the action or law is good or bad. Now, we'll proceed with John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill is the student of Jeremy Bentham. So, he is known to be one of the gifted philosophers. Maybe we could say that he was blessed because he developed his own philosophical utilitarian perspective based on the ideas of Jeremy Bentham, but it is quite different to the idea of Jeremy Bentham. Imagine this, as a part of his biography, at early age he was trained in many educational instructions. It was said that at the age of 3, he was taught of Greek and he is fluent on it. At the age of 8, he studied algebra, read the ancient philosophies like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and other philosophers. In his free time, he read Don Quixote. Wow, what an amazing biography, right? So, it is somehow impossible for a child for at the present moment or present time to read this. Even I've read it when I was around 20 years old. But for John Stuart Mill, at the age of 3 years old to 8 years old, he read all of this. Imagine that, okay? One of the few gifted philosophers in the world, one can perceive that in his early childhood, he has an amazing intellectual capacity and idealistic drive. That is why his philosophical thoughts is very evident in his promotion to social fairness and social justice. Okay? For him, it is not enough to base the goodness of the action from the act alone. If we do so, we can only get quantity of pleasure. So the difference between John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham is that John Stuart Mill is focused more on the idea of the quality of the pleasure, because for him, whatever is the action, what we are going to push through is to provide pleasure or happiness. But the one that we could remember, the one that we could uh, have this greater experience is the one that is having a higher quality of pleasure. That is why it is through the action that conforms with the rules and that it will produce a greater or have a more quality pleasure. That is why it is wrong to say and it is wrong to act in accordance to John Stuart Mill that morals should only attain happiness. It should first and foremost abide with the rules and must produce a qualitative result. Okay? Hopefully you'll understand this. So this is the idea of these people in utilitarianism. Okay? So, any questions and clarifications for that, you should ask me based on in our what you call this in our LMS. Now, as a summary, we have seen that Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, though they are using utilitarianism in order to express their idea of social justice and social norms, social worth, they are doing such in a different manner. But they have the similar ground that the happiness of the majority must be the basis of everything. And at the end of it, we have discovered that utilitarianism is an ethical principle that views of when to produce happiness and how to produce happiness, whether in society or in personal. It is true enough that when we perceive this, we can see the gauges of the happiness of the person based on the concepts of hedonism, teleology, and consequence. But in the other hand, Jeremy Bentham said that the perspective and the view of, of the action of the person must uh, see to it and monitor that there is the pleasure and pain that we should check on upon. Hence, because of this, we can have this conclusion that in order for us to have a better comprehension of how to understand the person with the use of this principle, the happiness of the person should be gauged. That is why we use this hedonic calculus and the idea of John Stuart Mill's principle of utility, the desirability, exhaustiveness, and impartiality, in order for us to check and to see the result of the action. So that is the explanation and the overview of what week 4 is all about. Now, once again, thank you for listening. And let me ask you, this is only at a point to ponder for you. Why do we always desire happiness? And does it entails that feeling of pain is not necessary, or pain is necessary to know what is true happiness is? Thank you and God bless.